Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the Delmarva Shorebirds 2024 season. The Shorebirds did not have a great record overall, going 53 and 78, but they had some interesting highlights along the way with plenty of young players taking promising steps forward in their development during their time in Salisbury this year. And we'll get to all of that in just a moment. But first, Orioles on the Verge is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of 200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. As I mentioned at the top of the show, the Delmarva Shorebirds just wrapped up their season with Sunday's regular season finale, closing out the year as a 53 and 78 record. Their final game did go down as a win. That was good for last place in the Carolina League North in the overall standings. The Shorebirds also finished in last place in the first and second halves of the season. However, there were some highlights. We saw a few young players making their full season debuts, put together promising years, including some members of the 2023 draft class, as well as players that the Orioles have signed internationally in the last few years. And often with the Shorebirds, they could have nights where they were a really exciting team to watch. They could have games with good starting pitching, a good performance from their lineup. But there were times where the lineup would slump. The bullpen could be hit or miss at points, and the defense often struggled. So, a little bit of a contradiction, I think, with the Shorebirds. And Nick, I'll start with you here. On one hand, you look at their overall record, which obviously is not very good, but it doesn't really tell the whole story of this team.
No, I don't really care all that much about the minor league team records, to be honest. I mean, you can make an argument that, yeah, if your minor league affiliates aren't winning games, then like the players aren't that good. But yeah, I think there's a lot more that goes into this. And this Delmarva team, yeah, some nights are rough to watch, but it was still one of my favorite levels to watch this year. And I mean, we're gonna dive into specific players, but I mean, there's a long list of guys who you look at what they did in Delmarva this year, specifically the bats, like Leandro Arias, um, Thomas Sosa. Look at some of these younger international prospects specifically. Maybe their stat lines didn't look that great in Delmarva, but they ended the year all in Aberdeen as like 19-year-old kids. So that tells you something right there. And they weren't just moved up to make room for the draft picks. The draft picks moved to Aberdeen pretty quickly themselves. So yeah, I think we saw a lot of really good things down at Delmarva, a lot of arms that weren't there very long that I thought would be there for a little bit longer. And a couple of guys who I think we'll definitely talk about tonight that stayed there all year that are a little bit perplexing. But yeah, I think surprised despite the record, I think this was one of the better years for some of the talent down there in Delmarva. They at least started the year in Delmarva.
Yeah, I have to agree. And Delmarva in particular, I don't really worry about the record too much because it's almost like full season FCL, but just moved up north into the cold weather in the beginning of the season. Yeah, plenty of great development there, especially on the pitching side. Feel like a lot of the biggest names and a lot of the guys that were the biggest risers on our top 50 list throughout the year ended the year in high A and got there pretty quickly. And it didn't slow them down at all. I think pretty much everybody that got promoted continued to have success once they were promoted. And yeah, Delmarva it's a great starting point. It is interesting the guys that stayed there all year. I don't know if that's more of just like there's not room or if we think it's better to work on things down here in a little bit of an easier environment before you make that jump. But regardless, love the development of the pitching. And then, like Nick said, the hitting, it might not jump off at the page, but a guy like Thomas Sosa, who's still super raw, super young, showed off the potential he has in the FCL, and he only had a OPS just under 700 in Delmarva, but was still super impressive, putting up elite exit velocities. And to me, it says a lot that they trusted him enough to go up to Aberdeen to end the year, even though, he's pretty much overmatched at this point in his career, but they must see it as him being able to handle it. Aaron Estrada, big breakout this year, started really bad in Delmarva. So, yeah, even guys that started in the FCL and ended in Delmarva, like Miguel Rodriguez, Edwin Amparo, Fernando Peguero in the last week, I'll talk about him, Ellis Cuevas, they all showed signs of life at full season ball to get ready for next season. I think overall it's got to be a success, and pretty much this season in Delmarva for me was the international side of the organization has arrived. It's not like still creeping up, which I mean technically it is, but to me it's like it's here. It's all the way up in Norfolk with Basayo, it's in Bowie, it's all over Aberdeen now, it's all over Delmarva, and it's here to stay and continue to get better and better at developing these guys.
Yeah, I don't have much concern about the win-loss record. I think if you're a fan of the Shorebirds, it matters to you. And I think that the organization, I'm sure in an ideal scenario, would see these players be in a winning environment. But that doesn't necessarily have to come in the minor leagues, especially at the lower levels of the system. Let's start off with the bats, because as you guys both mentioned, there were a lot of young hitters who broke out here in various ways. Sosa and Estrada are two that jump out, and Yudis Bordon put together a pretty nice year. And although his bigger breakout came after he was promoted to Aberdeen, we saw Leandro Arias start the year off in Delmarva, missed some time with an injury, but when he got back, laid the groundwork for what ended up being a strong finish to this season at the high A level. So, Nick, I'll go back to you. What stood out about this group?
Arias was interesting because he missed over a month due to an injury, and then didn't put up the great numbers in Delmarva like we talked about, but was still promoted to Aberdeen at 19. I just think that should tell you a lot about how the organization views him. I also think, I was looking around earlier, it looks like he is probably going to be one of the top draft picks in the Dominican Winter League, if anyone interested in some offseason minor league content already. But yeah, I think if he can keep the strikeouts down next year, because it looked like they took a bump up this year, but if he can keep the strikeouts down next year and start taking the kind of flashes of power that a lot of evaluators, at least nationally, when they talk about Arias, the reason they're so excited about Arias is because they see a lot of power potential, like plus power potential in that bat. If he can start showing more of that next year, like game power, I think we potentially see Leandro Arias break out next year. Aaron Estrada, just like hitters hit like that, and that's what he does. Like, he hit 296 when he was with Delmarva. Strikeouts were up, but he hit 8 home runs, which was shocking. That's a hard park to do that in. Wasn't expecting that power at all. He's also closing out the year as a 19-year-old in high A. Showed the speed, got on base. Once he got to Aberdeen, like, the strikeouts went down, and he finishes as a league average hitter, as like a 19-year-old in high A to end the year. So I'll take that. I think I said last week in our prospect re-rank, kind of Aaron Estrada, I envision like Freddie Ben Cosme with power. And again, I don't have his exit velo data, but I think if that power is there, like, he's got the good hit tool, he's got good walk and strikeout numbers, like, he could, I don't know, like, peak Aaron Estrada, legitimately a future starting second baseman in the big leagues with double-digit home run potential. I like that. And yeah, Sosa, I kept saying at the start of the year when I watched Sosa, I saw a guy who clearly belonged, but he was like dripping with tools and potential. But he was, like Bob said earlier, was just very raw. And this year, I figured it was just show improvements. By the end of the year, when we're doing this episode, can we say that Thomas Sosa improved from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? But then he got hurt. They eased him back into it. He didn't play a full game for a while after he returned from his injury. Still kind of felt the same, but like, it wasn't super ideal because he was a guy that I feel like he needed to be in that lineup every single night getting reps. He also got promoted to Aberdeen at the age of 19, and the strikeouts got better each month. The walks got better each month. I don't know. We saw him put up those back-to-back games at one point. He stopped sharing the videos after that, but the back-to-back videos of him punching like 112 plus 114 mile per hour doubles as a 18, 19-year-old kid, that's serious juice. that whole trio there was unbelievable. And I think, again, the fact that they got promoted at such a young age to high A speaks volumes about how the organization views them.
Yeah, these three guys are like legit prospects, and it, like I was saying, the surface level stats may not dictate that, but these guys are all 19, finished in high A, like Nick said. Aaron Estrada, terrible month April, like legitimately bad. But if you combine his stats from low A and high A from May 1st on, he had a 312 average, 839 OPS, 145 WRC plus, 9.2% walk rate, 14.6% strikeout rate. Just, I don't know what more you could ask for a guy his age, switch hitter at that, and especially in Delmarva with the pitcher-friendly ballpark. Leandro Arias was just super interesting because, like Nick said, when he got hurt, he was holding his own. Then he goes down into the FCL in his rehab and just owns it. Like, he walked over 15% of the time, struck out less than 12% of the time, had a ridiculous 579 isolated slugging percentage with 3 doubles, a triple, and 2 home runs in just 26 plate appearances. So there's your power. Clearly he's got it. And then he comes back up and kind of just holds his own again, gets promoted to Aberdeen, and just improves at every facet of his game except the in-game power. But we know it's there. And more than anything to me, and I know this is not like much, but to me he just looks the part. Like, I could just feel it watching him play that he's just a ball player that's going to continue to get better. We'll see if that is true in the long run, but to me, I like Arias a heck of a lot. And Thomas Sosa, talk about improvement. Just like Estrada, who started off so slow. If you take Thomas Sosa, his first month or so, beginning of the season to May 5th, he struck out 37.6% of the time, had an 85 WRC plus, 605 OPS, 11% walk rate, which was good, which if you go from May 6th to August 10th through August 10th, which is what his last game in Delmarva, he dropped his strikeout rate in that time all the way down to 22.6 while keeping a very similar walk rate, 747 OPS, 121 WRC plus. So clear as day improvement there. And then obviously went up to high A where he was a little overmatched, but 33.3% strikeout rate and a 13.1% walk rate. So it was still taking his walks. Just got to continue to cut down that strikeout rate and get that raw power, which we know is 110 plus exit velocities at 19, and get that into games more often.
I'll just touch on Mordon for a moment before we dive into the pitching staff. Mordon was promoted to Aberdeen before the season and still ended up leading the Shorebirds with 13 home runs. Young catcher at 20 years old, showed good power along with the 13 homers, also posted a 113 WRC plus and a 169 ISO. I think that there are some things that he clearly needs to work on. The hit tool at times leaves a lot to be desired. I know that there are questions about his defense, but for someone that young to put up that kind of power in their first full year of pro ball is a pretty encouraging sign. So we'll go now to the pitching staff, which you could say overall was the highlight of this team. The Shorebirds actually placed third in the Carolina League in strikeouts this season. Now, they were also among the league leaders in walks, again, placing third. But there were a lot of good pitchers who came through Delmarva this year. And some of those guys are going to get more discussion and more airtime in our next episode later this week, which is going to break down Aberdeen's season. So for recaps on Luis De Leon, Nestor Herman, Michael Ferret's season, you're going to want to check out that episode. But all three of those guys got off to very good starts at Delmarva before earning their promotions to Aberdeen. There were some pitchers who had very strong statistical cases for making the jump to Aberdeen before the season ended and ultimately never got there. Blake Money logged 103 innings for the Shorebirds, striking out 119 batters in that span while walking just 25 and posting a 3.15 ERA. Braxton Bragg had perhaps the best second half of any pitcher in the Orioles minor league system. He was dominant over the months of July and August and then into September. He ultimately logged 96 in the third innings for the Shorebirds. Riley Cooper gave Delmarva a very solid 88 innings. Jacob Cravey had his moments, 83 and 2/3 innings pitched. And then Juan Rojas, the guy that we've been talking about for a while, going back to when he was acquired by the Orioles in the Jorge Lopez trade in 2022. Young left-hander with good stuff, but has not been able to stay healthy since joining the Orioles system. He did, however, have a nice run at Delmarva this year after he came off the IL, delivering 53 and 2/3 innings with the Shorebirds and fanning 64 batters in that stretch. So if you're going to look at the balance of the season, Money and Bragg are the guys that jump out at you. And Cooper, had a good year as well. I can't figure out why they were not promoted to Aberdeen, and that's perhaps something we could talk about here. But just on their numbers alone and their performances at Delmarva, I want to get your guys' thoughts, starting with Nick.
Yeah, I guess just to look at Cooper and Money first, like you said, both these guys had great seasons. I question how the org views them because they're both national champs at LSU, like the premier SEC school in college baseball. Both turned 23 in just a couple of weeks. Neither was promoted, while a lot of the younger arms, less experienced arms, I mean, Michael Frett, like you mentioned, was a JUCO kid who had a couple of innings at Delmarva, gets to jump to Aberdeen. Nestor Herman was from Seattle, misses a big stretch of the season, returns pretty much instantly, gets promoted after he returned to the mound and found his footing again. Like there are a lot. Luis De Leon, he had innings last year. He rightfully, deservedly so, got promoted when he did. But there are a lot of guys who I feel like jumped Cooper and Money this year, despite Cooper and Money putting up really big numbers. I think maybe that tells you something. I don't know. Like maybe you can move Riley Cooper into the bullpen and a path opens up for him. I think that could be intriguing. There's obviously no physical projection there left with Riley Cooper. He is who he is. But Blake Money is the interesting one, the more interesting one for me though, because like he had 119 strikeouts, just 25 walks, 103 innings. The FIP and XFIP are both sub 3. They gave him a $150,000 signing bonus as a 17th round draft pick. Like it wasn't an innings thing in Aberdeen, I don't think, because of all those guys who jumped him in the rotation. I don't know. I think maybe that tells you something. I don't know. I feel like the more advanced SEC arm who was successful all year would have gotten promoted, and he didn't. So for me, like that kind of raises some red flags.
The only other thing I could think of for Blake Money, who just was fantastic, especially after a pretty unlucky start to the season. I feel like his FIP was way better than his ERA for most of the year, and then by the end, it was pretty much in line because he was that good down the stretch. But 28% strikeout rate, 5.9% walk rate, only a 211 average against. But he's 6'7", 240 pounds he's listed as. So maybe they just felt like whatever we're working on here, let's not mix it up too much. Let's not mess up a good thing. I mean, he was the opening day starter for them. So I feel like there's some hope that they think that he could be a starter long term, but maybe Cooper especially, I think, is going to be a reliever eventually. I just feel like he did not have enough strikeout stuff, started walking more guys as the year went on. I think a bullpen role is definitely in there for him, but Blake Money, that's the one where I thought he could have been promoted for sure at the end of the season, but maybe for being a big, tall guy that they felt like keeping him where he was comfortable. I'm not sure, but Braxton Bragg for me was the one that was like, why is this guy not getting promoted? He's almost 24 years old. He was not walking anybody, a 5.4% walk rate, 30.1% strikeout rate, and clearly better than the competition in low A because his last 7 starts, he had a 0.98 ERA over 36.2 innings, only walking 4 batters and striking out 47. So I don't know what's going on there. Probably reliever long term. I mean, I think he could be a really good reliever with his deceptive sidearmy delivery and his location plus probably going to be pretty good whenever that comes out. So it's interesting. These guys, I still like them, but I'm not sure, like you said, if they're going to have the stuff or the upside as the Ferretts, Gibsons, and Ermans of the world.
Yeah, Bob, that's a good point with Cooper that maybe the strikeout and walk numbers were a little up and down this year. And with Bragg, his first half was, I think he had some tough luck in some outings. He was also not getting very deep into games. And then it was really about the end of July where he turned things on and then was dominant from there. I agree. I thought that he should have been promoted to Aberdeen before this season ended. And the only thing that I can really and the only conclusion I can really draw without knowing anything else, and this is just pure speculation on my part, is that pitcher promotions slowed down as Bragg was heating up. So, they were not bringing guys that were part of this year's draft class up to Delmarva to get innings in. We didn't see a lot of movement from Aberdeen to Bowie down the stretch. And you've had constant back and forth between AAA and the majors this year to fill in innings in the bullpen. And I think that I can't remember off the top of my head, and either one of you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like outside of the undrafted free agents that went to Delmarva, along with the Keeler Morphe, Yeber Cartea types coming up from the short season levels, that Nestor Herman's promotion from Delmarva to Aberdeen was really the last big one that we saw this year on the pitching side. And that was in the second half of the season. It wasn't like that happened, 2 weeks ago. That was early on in the second half.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a lot easier for the hitters. Like you saw that wave of promotions for the final week of the season going from Delmarva to Aberdeen. I feel like it's a whole lot easier for the bats just to be like, all right, go to Aberdeen, take a couple hacks in the box, like you're good. Here's a nice little taste of where you're going to start next year. But for the pitchers, I feel like you're on your schedule, you've got your rotation, you've got everything involved there. I feel like there's a lot more going into a move for the pitcher. So like once you get to this point of the year and you're also reaching like your innings limits, guys are getting shut down. Like, Edgar Portis ended the year on the development list. No cause for concern there. He reached his innings limit probably. So like why have a guy move and when you could just finish the year down there? I do think that's the thing with Bragg because it was that first half of the year or so, he did struggle with consistency. But then he found his groove. Bob rattled off the numbers, just unbelievable. I guess when I was looking at it, maybe like he was a reliever when he was at Nebraska, which he was also roommates with Cade Povich, by the way. But he transferred to Dallas Baptist in his final year of college. That's when he worked as a starter. So this was his first year as a pro, only second year as a starter. I don't know if maybe there's like an adjustment period. They're tinkering with his mix. They're tinkering with his profile, whatever it was. Maybe trying to better set him up for success to be a starter long-term. And then once he settled in and adjusted, you saw that continued success, but he stayed healthy all year. Finished strong down the stretch. I don't know. He doesn't have a ton of velo, but I know coming out of college, he was touching like 96, 97. And like Bob said, he's got that kind of, sidearm release point. I almost wonder if there is this, if anything, I think Braxton Bragg created a really solid floor this year in my eyes, where maybe he doesn't work out as a starter as he moves up because of the velo, but he has such good location, such good walk and strikeout numbers, good swing and miss stuff. He's got that little bit of a unique delivery. If he can run it up to 96, 97 in a bullpen role, I think that's going to help his value a lot moving forward. But yeah, at least he ended the year strong. And then some other guys, like real quick to close out the pitchers there with Delmarva, like you mentioned, Yeber Cartea, 21 years old, 6'5" righty, signed out of Venezuela in May of 2022. I think I said after his first outing in Delmarva a few weeks ago that I was really intrigued because he struggled to find the zone a little bit. I think he hit a couple guys in that first outing. I think I said he looked like kind of like a baby giraffe learning how to walk because he's so tall and lanky and struggled to put it all together. But you look at his final line in Delmarva, he pitched 24 innings with the Shorebirds, had a 1.11 ERA, 31 strikeouts to 11 walks. Like he throws in the mid to upper 90s. He's got a deep pitch mix. I love what I see out of him in terms of like physical projection as well. I think he ended the year on a super high note. Juan Rojas, he doesn't turn 21 until January. Was finally healthy, had good strikeout numbers, limited contact. I almost wonder if he could be next year's Moises Chase-esque jump next year. We'll see, but just glad to see him healthy. And one more name to throw out there for the pitchers in Delmarva, Ty Weatherly. He's old. He's an old man down there. He turns 24 in a couple days, and he missed pretty much all year with an injury. But like he had 35 innings in total this year, a 2.02 ERA, and 48 strikeouts in those 35 innings. He's 6'6". He's lanky as hell, but I don't know. I think he's kind of a super sleeper, interesting arm down there in Delmarva.
Yeah, talk about a guy who, if you move him to the bullpen, could probably move pretty quick. He's got excellent stuff. It's all about any type of control for him. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Weatherly. Echo Correa, he got promoted earlier on. Doesn't have great numbers, but young and promising. It's just the pitching is astronomically deep in this organization now, almost like the hitting was when Elias first took over. But yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. One more name though before we move on to Aberdeen or wrap this one up. I don't know if you guys are still intrigued right now, what your thoughts are on Braylon Tavera or what you saw out of him. If you just look at his player page and look at his numbers, they aren't good at all. And I think if you look at how much money he got as a signing bonus, he's one of the higher paid guys in the Elias era. And I think those numbers he put up this year make it look even worse. But and it's no shot at the international program at all. It's thriving right now. Even if Michael Hernandez and Braylon Tavera turn out to be busts, like what this organization is doing on the international side of things is night and day different. But I don't know. I just always had the questions about Tavera because I felt like what I saw, the scouting report and the stats, like nothing ever matched up with him. I felt better after we talked with Anthony Villa before the season started. And you got kind of get like, sift through everything, the front office speak there with him. But I felt a little bit better about Tavera entering the season. And then I know he got hurt, I think a couple of times. He landed on the IL. He's only 20 years old as well, or 19. He doesn't turn 20 until late February, actually, the next year. So I don't know. I think I saw enough to let's see what he can do next year back in Delmarva. But I don't know what you guys thought about Tavera this year.
You know what makes me not give up on Braylon Tavera at all is Michael Hernandez is back, guys. I don't know if you know this, but since August 15th, he, to the end of the season, about a month, 279 average, 741 OPS, 129 WRC plus, 14.6% walk rate, 24.4% strikeout rate. Great defense, apparently, at shortstop and third base. I mean, talk about being on your last breath and then finally showing something. I'm not going to say I did just say he's back, but I'm encouraged. I'm not going to say that he's like going to get his prospect status right back, but I think he might have earned himself another shot next year back in Delmarva to begin the year. But that alone gives me hope with Tavera, especially because with Hernandez, they just didn't move him up until it was like a last resort, it seemed like this year. So Tavera, it seems like they're at least comfortable with him failing at that level at that age and hoping he can learn from it. So we'll see. He can steal bases. He hit his first home run in the last game of the season. That was probably a nice relief. If he could tap into that power a little more often, get the hit tool going, maybe there's some hope.
Yeah, when I saw Tavera last month when I went to Delmarva, it was a good night for him. He went 2 for 4 in that game. He had some really good at bats. What I saw there was good, good plate approach, pace and hitter with a line drive stroke, and the walks did go up as the season went on, and the strikeouts went down. So if you want to take away something encouraging from the final weeks of the season with Tavera, that's it. A few things that I've kind of noticed, though, when I was also watching him is that as he's starting to fill out, I do see more of a corner profile going forward, and that's going to put more pressure on him to develop power. And the other thing is that although he didn't miss, in the grand scheme of things, that much time this year with the injury, it was still about a month and a half where he was not at low A. And I kind of wonder what that time there could have done for him, and if some of the positives that we saw towards the end of the season would have surfaced a little bit sooner, because he went on the IL after their game on May 10th, didn't get an at-bat again until June 20th in the FCL, and didn't come back to Delmarva until 5 days later on the 25th. So maybe without that injury, Tavera comes on a little bit sooner and has a better second half. But because of some of the positive takeaways you could have from his late season stretch and his age, I haven't given up on him yet. But I do think that this year probably put a little bit of a dent in his current prospect status. And with that, now we'll go into our final segment of the night where we shout out a player outside of the top 30 portion of our top 50 list for something they've done recently, whether it's been a good game or a good week, or maybe we just want to recognize something interesting in their stat line. And I will start with Bob this week, who has a hitter that I think we're going to be paying a lot more attention to in 2025, and a pitcher who's been one of the steadier relievers in the Orioles system for a while now.
Yeah, the hitter for me, Fernando Peguero, who after the FCL season, I mean, he had a great DSL season last year where he had a 140 WRC plus over 217 plate appearances, showed off speed with 20 steals, couple home runs. Goes to the FCL this year and was a guy to watch. He got better as the year went on. Ultimately ended up with a 75 WRC plus. Still 10.9% walk rate, 13% strikeout rate, good numbers, 32 stolen bases. And then after the FCL season ended, he went to AAA and just basically lived on their bench for the most of the second half of the season as just a warm body. He was, 4 for 15 with 4 singles in the limited action he got there, 7 strikeouts in those 15 plate appearances. But then last week or two of the season, he goes to Delmarva, where he just, in 22 plate appearances, bats .444 with a 1.268 OPS, 255 WRC plus. Just absolutely on fire. 4 walks, 5 stolen bases, a double, 2 triples. Now it's like, okay, maybe this is translatable to full season ball. If he can start back there next season, maybe he can continue to build on that. So just an interesting name to keep an eye out for. And Yaki Rivera would be my pitcher who ends the year. I think he got the Aberdeen MVP award, a 1.99 ERA on the season, over 54 and a third innings, struck out 59 batters, walked 27. So overall, that's a 25.9% strikeout rate and 11.8% walk rate. But if you go and look at his stats from June 16th through the end of the year, he really started ramping up the strikeout stuff. Let's see how many innings this was. 30.1 innings, so more than half of a season total. 1.78 ERA with a 31.7% strikeout rate and a similar walk rate, 12.2%. Batting average against of 168. So really think Yaki Rivera starting next year in AA Bowie. And he is still just 21 years old, turned 21 a little less than 2 months ago. So still very young. I think there's a big-time relief prospect here in the making.
I like him. I'm going to go, I'll start with my batter, who was up in AAA. And because we're winding down, and I don't think we've mentioned his name in this segment in a while, and we have to, because this is his segment, I'm going with TT Bowens. He's up in AAA, had 2 doubles and 2 home runs last week alone. So a good week for Bowens, he's only hitting 164 in 21 games since being promoted, 244 on base percentage, but he's not striking out a ton. Strikeout rate, has been pretty high throughout his career, but strikeouts look pretty good so far in AAA. And it's good to see him get a pair of home runs this week. So had to shout out TT Bowens before the season ends. And then my pitcher, I'm going down again to an undrafted free agent. It's been kind of a trend here for my pitchers in this segment. And Joe Glassie was an undrafted pitcher out of Illinois. He was their closer this year. He pitched a couple of outings this past week, scoreless outings, but on the year, he made 7 appearances for the Shorebirds, 7 2/3 innings pitched, just 1 earned run, no walks, 7 strikeouts, 3 for 3 in save opportunities. So stepped right into the closing role for Delmarva, which was awesome to see. Pretty good start to his pro career there. It's kind of fun to follow these undrafted free agent guys, and a couple more hopefully make their debuts next year with Delmarva. But shout out to Joe Glassie on that debut.
I'll start off with my pitcher this week, and it's a guy that we were talking about a lot early on this year, but then he hit a wall after promotion to AAA, and that's Cade Stroud. Stroud put together a pretty nice week last week as the Tides took on the Charlotte Knights, appearing in 3 games. In that span, delivered 3 innings with 5 strikeouts, no walks, while scattering 3 hits. Stroud, when he is on, has some of the best stuff of any relief prospect in this organization. He's got a really good fastball, which has looked flat out dominant in the early phases of this year. Just to recap, he started this season at Bowie, delivered 10 in the third innings there without giving up an earned run. He was then promoted to Norfolk, and ever since then, it's been really up and down for him. But hopefully last week is a sign that he's going to come on strong in the final weeks of the season. And my hitter this week is a guy who was just promoted from high A to double A, and that's Carter Young. Young put together a really, really nice debut week at Bowie, appearing in 6 games, going 5 for 18 at the plate with 2 doubles. We have seen Young do this before, where he'll go through these really cold stretches, and then he'll have a week or two where he's hitting the ball all over the place, drawing walks, showing a little bit more power, and then he'll come back down to earth, and he'll come crashing back down to earth. And if you look at his stat line this year, in a lot of areas, he's regressed from his first full season, which was last year, split between Delmarva and Aberdeen. He did have a tough time with high A this year, but it's good to see him hit the ground running in Bowie, and hopefully we see more prolonged stretches of success from Young going forward, because there are some things that he does really well. He plays good defense as a middle infielder, can draw walks. He's got some sneaky power, but the consistency with the bat just hasn't been there during his pro career.
New age Caden Grenier, maybe. I don't know. Good to see him at least end the year at the level that he did, considering he really struggled for long stretches there. And the Orioles did give him a lot of money, but we don't need to get into that argument there. I think it was still a decent, risky bet, but a bet worth taking, I think.
And that does it for this look at the Delmarva Shorebirds season. We will be back later this week to recap the high A Aberdeen Ironbirds, and we're going to talk about a lot more big-name pitching prospects, as well as some hitters that stood out during the Ironbirds season in 2024. That'll be up on later this week, and in the meantime, you can catch us on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And although we are in the late stages of the season, it is still a good time to sign up for our Patreon community, as our September update of our top 50 just dropped last week. We talked about some of the players we discussed tonight and more, so you're not going to want to miss that. Sign up to become a patron today.
For including Bob Phil and Jordan Sanchez, for anybody interested in learning more about him.
For Bob Phil and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Sped, and you've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by Bet Online and part of the Believe Podcast Network.
Sorry, I had to.
You just need to start throwing in some. I know we're still live. Start throwing in random nuggets like that to see who catches them and who doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And we're back for our second recap of a minor league team this week. This time we're going to be looking at the Aberdeen Ironbirds, who finished over 500 and were in the playoff race until the final week of the season, and had several big-name prospects, both on the pitching and hitting sides. And we'll talk about that in tonight's episode. But first, Orioles on the Verge is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. The Ironbirds this season went 67-65 and made a push for a playoff spot in the second half of the year until being eliminated in the final week of the season. Their 33-33 second half followed a pretty strong first half in which they finished 34-32. And one of the big themes of the podcast this year has been that this is the year of the pitcher. We're really seeing the Orioles pitching depth improve in ways that it has not in the minor leagues in a long time. And a lot of guys who seemingly are more under the radar type prospects are having big years. And Aberdeen is the perfect case study for that because you could look at both their bullpen and their starting rotation, which had names like Luis De Leon, Michael Ferret, Zach Fruit, and others, Trey Gibson, Nestor Herman, who put together really solid 2024 seasons. And we'll be talking about them tonight. But of course, the Ironbirds also had some really interesting bats. Enrique Bradfield Jr. put together a nice run for them. Creed Willems in his second go around at high A was much better than he had been the first time around. That ultimately earned him a promotion to Double A. And even Reed Trimble, who had kind of started to slip off the radar a little bit because of years of injuries, had a healthy and productive stretch at Aberdeen before being promoted to Bowie and unfortunately landing on the IL again. But his time with the Ironbirds was very good. So we've got a lot we can talk about here, not to mention that the Zach Eflin trade really took shape in Aberdeen thanks to Matt Horvath, Jackson Baumeister, and Matthew Etzel and what those three players did during their time with the Ironbirds. So there's a lot that we could talk about with Aberdeen, but I want to start with the pitching staff. Bob, there's a lot of pitchers that stood out, and we'll be talking about them tonight individually. But when you look at this Ironbirds team, they ended up with pretty strong numbers. What were your thoughts on their pitchers?
Nothing but great things to say about the pitching. I mean, even Cameron Weston, who we'll talk about him more next week and is in line, probably at least a contender for minor league pitcher of the year for the Orioles. He started in high A before quickly moving up. Juan Nunez, rest in peace. I'm assuming it's Tommy John at the surgery. I'm assuming it's Tommy John at this point in time just because you haven't heard anything. He had a great year before going down. But yeah, like guys like Michael Ferret, Trey Gibson, Zach Fruit, Nestor Herman, even Levi Wells, flash stuff. Preston Johnson got better as the year went on. Edgar Portes became a legit like top 20, top 15 type pitching prospect in the system. Luis De Leon, I'm sure we'll get into him with his struggles, at least on the surface. But yeah, I mean, even in the bullpen, guys like Yaki Rivera, who I talked about in the last episode, Cooper Chandler, Zane Barnhart, like just pitchers just shuffling in and out, having success. And as we have said at some point in time, multiple times this season, Aberdeen actually played as a little bit more of a hitter's park than expected. But I guess that just means the pitching was all the better. But yeah, I mean, pitching was the highlight. If you're going to Aberdeen Ironbirds game in 2024, it was mostly to see the pitching because the hitting was some highlights, but the pitching was where it was at.
Yeah, it's like Matt Horvath struggled for much of his time here, and then he started getting hot and then got moved. Enrique Bradfield Jr. really got hot his last few weeks there with Aberdeen. Then he gets promoted. Creed Willems just mashed all year. But yeah, it's definitely the pitching was the highlight for me. You've got Bob mentioned some of the names there. I think that went under the radar this year, like Zane Barnhart. Actually, I didn't realize how well he pitched this year. I don't think we mentioned his name once this year on the podcast. I don't think we tweeted about him one time this year either, but he was a 17th round draft pick last year out of Hillsdale. I'm assuming that's a real place. I don't know where. I don't know what level, but it's college, I guess. But he's a local kid. We do know that. Local kid born in Maryland. I think he was born in Towson. Very quietly, 43 innings, a 2.47 ERA for Aberdeen, 44 strikeouts. Like walks were high, but I mean, yeah, you don't see many 17th round draft picks have that kind of success in their first year as a pro. Bob ended the last episode talking about Yaki Rivera. Like that's young kid. He was the MVP, a 1.99 ERA, 59 strikeouts in 37 innings. Aberdeen's bullpen was fantastic. I know lots of comments all year about how bad Norfolk's bullpen was, which had plenty of bright spots. Don't let those games fool you. Aberdeen's bullpen was really solid all year long, and they really didn't have to work that hard because this rotation in Aberdeen was pretty unbelievable all year. And yeah, we can, dive into some of the names. I don't know where you guys want to start. maybe start with a guy with the lowest ERA. Actually, he was among qualified pitchers. He had the lowest ERA in the South Atlantic League in Zach Fruit. Like he was a senior sign, a 9th-round pick out of Troy, signed for $40,000, so $130K below slot value. He's supposed to just, all right, you're intriguing, but you're a money saver for the other guys. He ends up leading the South Atlantic League with a 3.03 ERA among qualified pitchers, 113 strikeouts and 107 innings, all at the high A level. So over 100 innings, like that's pretty awesome. I love the interview he did at the beginning of the year too, where it was like, I hated my changeup. I want to ditch it. So they put it under the Edgertronic camera, tweaked it, and he said it immediately became his favorite pitch. Like, I think that speaks volumes about him. I think it speaks volumes about, it's a prime example. It speaks volumes about the pitching development in this organization. He became a workhorse starter for the Ironbirds. I don't know. I do have, it's not a hot take at all, but as much as success he found as a starter this year, I really like Zach Fruit kind of projecting ahead a little bit. He may be, a workhorse in Bowie's rotation next year, but I think Zach Fruit in, a year and a half, 2 years or so could potentially be a really fun, like high power, late inning bullpen arm in the majors. He was throwing 100 miles per hour in college. The stuff is better. The stuff alone is getting Mason Miller comps coming into the draft. I think Zach Fruit was probably, I know he's got a lot of like cult following among Orioles fans, but I think Zach Fruit was one of the arms that took the biggest steps forward this year.
Yeah, completely agree, especially if they want to go that route. Just let him loose in a bullpen. That would be so much fun. Could still see improvements next year going into lowering the walk rate, trying to get more strikeouts, just like with any pitcher. 25.1% strikeout rate, 12.2% walk rate, both of which are not terrible numbers, but they could be improved. FIP was a little bit worse than the ERA, but even like he just got soft contact. Like people did not square him up very much. A 199 batting average against. And yeah, like you just said, a workhorse. I was kind of hoping he would get a bump up to Bowie at one point or another, but like we talked about with the Delmarva pitchers, at a certain point you might as well just stay where you are and keep things comfortable. But obviously we'll be in Bowie's rotation to start next season, and I'm really looking forward to see what types of improvements he makes from here to then.
Yeah, I thought he was excellent this year, and honestly, I didn't have a complete sense of how the Orioles were going to use him as the season started. And a lot of pitchers early on are in that piggyback role. And it's like, all right, what path are they going to take with Fruit? Is he going to be a starter? Is he going to be a reliever? Because in his college career, the only year where he started every game was 2022 at Eastern Michigan. Otherwise, he was either primarily a reliever or in a hybrid role. So he comes in the Orioles organization, 25 games, 21 starts in his first full year of pro ball. And you guys mentioned he really emerged as a workhorse for the Ironbirds. And I think that was a great thing for him. And really what I want to see next year when he gets to AA is how does the stuff hold up multiple times through the order against more advanced hitters, because that's probably going to tell us a lot about whether or not he sticks in a rotation or lands in the bullpen. But I fully agree with Nick. If it doesn't work out in the rotation for Fruit, you've got a guy that has high leverage reliever stuff.
I like it. And you guys mentioned Luis De Leon and some of his struggles. Not the opposite end of the spectrum there, because this is still an elite pitching prospect, in my opinion. But the numbers, yeah, definitely weren't what I think we expected when he got to high A. But you won't find many left-handed pitchers who throw 96, 97 with the true unicorn changeup, multiple secondary offerings. I think he's 9th on our latest top 50 update, and we're bullish on him. Baseball America put him 8th on their latest top 30 update. So, and even described him as a mid-rotation starter potential there. So that's speaks volumes about De Leon despite the numbers. Doesn't turn 22 until April. So 2 years younger than the average high A player. The walks were up when he got promoted, but I I don't know. He still had a ground ball rate of like 60%, which is absurd. I just think this is a guy who the Orioles are going to bring about a little bit slower because like, he had 28 innings his first year in pro ball, 53 innings last year, and then he had 87 this year. And clearly, once he eclipsed the 53 innings, he started wearing down a little bit. So I think he's young. They got to work to really build up his innings and fight through that. Which he still had a couple of really good outings at the end of the year, despite probably being exhausted and just running on fumes there with that arm. But yeah, I think you talk about stuff and potential. Luis De Leon is certainly one of the more intriguing and top pitching prospects in this entire organization, despite what the numbers said this year.
Yeah, not very concerned at all. Just felt bad from a confidence standpoint that the numbers were as bad as they were. 5.73 ERA, but his FIP is 4.46, xFIP 4.34. Batters hit, or not batters hit, his BABIP against was 379, which is just ridiculously high. So got to think that's going to get better, especially fresh and taking from this experience improvement over the offseason. Underreported how much of a ground ball pitcher this guy is, despite just having electric high heat out from the left side. This season was in high A was actually the first time he's had a ground ball percentage under 60% at 59.1. Last year in low A, over 26.1 innings, he had a 73.4% ground ball rate. Just ridiculous. Still super high on this kid, and can't wait to see him earn a promotion to Double-A Bowie midseason 2025.
Anecdotally, I did a lot of dailies in the second half when De Leon would appear in a game for Aberdeen, and it seemed like it was the same story a lot of times where he would come in and out of the bullpen, and he would either be bad on the front end and then settle down and put together a couple of decent innings after that, or he would come out of the gate really strong, put together back-to-back really good innings, and then unravel in the third. And that was a sign to me that he was really wearing down. And Nick, you just brought up the numbers. I mean, he far and away eclipsed his career high in innings pitched this season. And honestly, and this is a credit to him, I expected him to get shut down before the season ended. I wouldn't have been shocked if in mid-August the Orioles decided De Leon was finished for the year and put him on the development list. But he went out there. He continued to pitch. He had a couple of decent outings at the end of the season. The one thing I would be interested to see, though, next year, I'm kind of hoping that he's primarily a starter right away in Aberdeen, because that's one thing that I notice is that he was only a starter at Delmarva. He had some short outings, but he was only a starter at Delmarva. Then he went to Aberdeen and started to pitch in the piggybacking role, and some of his worst outings this season with Aberdeen were out of the bullpen. So I just wonder if he's one of those guys that has a hard time making an adjustment to that routine of having to come in to the middle of the game. And just keep in mind, he's very, very raw at this point. He's only going to be 22 next season in high A, which is pretty good. And his stuff, there just are not a lot of pitchers in the minor leagues, frankly, who have the stuff that he has from the left side, which is why I have said before, and I still believe that if he puts everything together, he's going to be a top 100 prospect at some point.
I think it's interesting, the piggyback role. I don't know if you have the numbers, like the specific numbers there between what he did when he came in relief versus when he was a starter, because I remember in the offseason and doing our countdown, and I looked at Cameron Weston, when he was in that piggyback role in Aberdeen, the numbers were way better for him when he got the start versus when he came in relief. And then look what he did in Bowie this year as a starter. So I almost wonder if Luis De Leon could follow that same trend. That'd be interesting.
Here's the breakdown. 64, and this is between Delmarva and Aberdeen that he had these numbers. 18 starts for 64 in the third innings, 77 strikeouts against 29 walks, 4.2 ERA. 8 games out of the bullpen for 23 in the third innings, 29 strikeouts to 20 walks with a 5.79 ERA. So if you go by strikeout per 9, which isn't the best number, but it's the one right in front of me, his strikeout per 9 was up out of the bullpen compared to the rotation, but the walk rate clearly not good in the ERA, more than a run and a half higher.
Maybe there's something there.
Before we move on to hitters, I think we could agree that if De Leon follows the development path of Edgar Portes, we will be very happy, because Portes last year overcame a little bit of a slow start, I believe, at Delmarva. Finished strong there before the promotion to Aberdeen. Went back there this year and put together an excellent season. 94 in the third innings pitched, 119 strikeouts against 49 walks. He also had a 3.34 ERA. At one point, it was him and Moises Chase in the conversation of who is the biggest breakout at Aberdeen. Chase obviously traded to the Phillies at the deadline in the Gregory Soto deal, but the Orioles still have Portes in their system. I love his fastball. I just think it has such good movement, such a good profile, good late movement up in the zone. But the rest of his pitch mix is really coming together.
Yeah, I love Portes. And like you said, it starts with that fastball. I listen to a lot of Rates and Barrels, and Eno Sarris says most important pitch is have a great fastball with the good stuff plus, and you can build from there. That's Edgar Portes to a T, in my opinion. He's kind of the opposite of Luis De Leon when it comes to ground ball percentage. He had an 18.2% ground ball rate in high A last year. Granted, it was 3.2 innings, but in the 30% range for most of his career. And he's also just 21 years old. I mean, I think he'll turn 22 before Luis De Leon does, but still super young guy who, as we are talking about with Luis De Leon, there's proof that a guy like this can make those improvements, which we already know, but it's nice to see it in action with Portes. And I think he's like, I know he's Rule 5 eligible. They probably won't put him on just because I don't think there's any chance that a team's going to take him. But he's, from a talent perspective, he's worth adding to the 40-man roster because he'll start next year in AA Bowie at 22 years old. And if he can build on this season, then again, as these pitchers continue to creep up the system, I don't think the Orioles farm system is going to fall off as much as some people think it will because of guys like Portes who are just continuing to develop and show great stuff as they move up the system.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up with Portes because the numbers are fantastic. He honestly has one of my favorite deliveries in the system. It's so smooth. He worked out with Pedro Martinez in the offseason, and you could tell from the delivery. The only thing with Portes is what Bob mentioned there is why I'm hesitant to get like super attached to Portes is because he is Rule 5 eligible this offseason. And yeah, he very likely does start in Bowie's rotation or as part of some piggyback option, depending on how many arms are up there in Bowie. But he's Rule 5 eligible this winter. He's not getting added to the 40-man roster. I think there's a 0% chance he gets picked. You don't have to worry about that. But it's next year. It's next winter when if he starts off really good in Bowie and takes off, sure, you add him to the 40-man. You don't even really think about it that hard. He's a 40-man candidate. But if he's kind of fringy, like he gets off to a slow start, or it's just like he's making gains, but like, can you use a 40-man spot on this guy who's going to need a lot of time next year or the year after that in AAA? I think he could potentially be a guy that you use to like sweeten the deal, either this offseason or at next year's trade deadline. We saw the Rule 5 purge at this deadline. I think Portes, if he continues to pitch like he did this year, could end up being one of those Rule 5 casualties again. But like that's a good thing. Like the Orioles traded a lot of good pitching prospects for major leaguers, and Portes could be the next in line there. Or he starts next year in Bowie's rotation, takes off. He's in Norfolk by the All-Star break, and we're having a Brandon Young type conversation about Edgar Portes. But interested to see where that journey kind of shakes out next year.
We could spend an entire episode breaking down Aberdeen's pitching staff, and I do want to get to the hitter, so we will wrap up, but I think we'd be remiss to not talk about a couple more arms in Michael Ferret and Nestor Herman. We kind of teased this a little bit on our episode earlier this week about the Shorebirds. Both of these guys had meteoric rises this season, which was their first full year in pro ball, although they kind of took different paths to get there. Ferret, unheralded pitcher out of a JUCO school, went to Delmarva, was dominant there, and went to the Aberdeen. And while there were some rough patches along the way, he made the adjustments I think you wanted to see him make as the season went on. I feel pretty good about him going into 2025. And then with Herman, early season injury, but then was flat out dominant when he came back from off the IL with the Shorebirds, was promoted to Aberdeen on August 1st, and then went on to pitch 25 and a third innings, striking out 33 batters and only walking 3, which is just a really, really good stat. Just before we get into the hitters, just your thoughts on these two guys.
The gifts just keep on giving. Michael Ferret, I keep forgetting how young he is. We were talking about Edgar Portes and Luis De Leon, 21 years old in high A, and how young they are. Michael Ferret is 20 years old right now, and he'll be 20 years old when next season starts. I think his birthday is in April or May. But it's just ridiculous. He absolutely dominated low A, and then goes up to high A. Yeah, he struggled a little bit, 4.35 ERA, similar FIP, up or down a little bit. But he kept the strikeout rate pretty much right in line. 29.9% went down to 28.1 going up to Aberdeen, and the walk rate only went up from 9.1% to 10.9. So you can see that he continued to just pitch his game and just filthy stuff. And you can see why, as he continues to mature and grow and develop, how he could be a mid to potentially upper rotation starter. Yeah, just so much to like there. I want to mention Trey Gibson as well real quick, the undrafted free agent. We talked about him a lot. He's 22, so still fairly young for the level, and he just heavy pitches, great ground ball rate. FIP was better than his ERA in low A and high A. Just shout out to him. Very curious to see how he does next year. And yeah, Nestor German. I mean, what else is there to say? You have a 1.49 ERA in almost 50 innings with Delmarva. The FIP is 2.09, so not a fluke. A 30% strikeout rate, 7.4% walk rate. Amazing numbers. Goes up to high A and does even better in 25.1 innings with a 1.78 ERA, 2.33 FIP, 34% strikeout rate, and a 3.1% walk rate. That's like Zebby Matthews for the Twins-esque. Just, I don't even know if we know what we have on our hands with Nestor German still, but looking pretty ridiculous at this point.
We don't. There will be the mailbag question. Who is this Herman kid in about 2 weeks? Yeah, Herman and Gibson summed up pretty well there. The 33 strikeouts to 3 walks in high A alone for Nestor Herman. Small school kid, unknown kid, missed a big chunk of the year. I don't think it's crazy to say that Nestor Herman and Trey Gibson, I don't think it's out of the question to say they start next year in Bowie, to be honest. I don't know, maybe I'm just being super optimistic about these two, but they're older guys. They're college guys. I could see it. If not, they're going to have the opportunity to potentially end next year in AAA if they pitch like they did this year. You start facing much better competition in AA, obviously. So it's like, pump the brakes a little bit on these guys, but they're just, like Zach said, we could do 3 hours on just the arms that came through Aberdeen alone. There's a really good foundation here, and there's this massive pool of arms of next year. We get to see a lot of these guys are going to start back in Aberdeen, but a lot of them are going to start in Bowie. There's just this massive pool of pitchers that we get to watch at the beginning of next year and say, all right, who's going to break out? Who are finally going to be the guys where national media starts, respecting these guys or giving them attention and asking who is that? And even Orioles fans who follow the minor leagues a little bit start to maybe shout out some more respect to these arms that the Orioles are developing. Herman and Gibson are both there. Ferret, that kid, 99 innings this year, and he was some scrawny JUCO kid that they got out of Florida last year. Revamped the pitch mix, increased the velo. You see all the videos come out from Tread where he trained in the offseason. I'm like, all right, I don't know who this kid is. I know he drafted him, but this super skinny kid, I think I've made the joke before. He made Blaine Knight look like he had some meat on his bones. I don't know. He's now adding 4 miles per hour to his fastball in the offseason and throwing all different type of pitch mix. Is he going to blow his arm out this year? And I don't know. Nope. From the first start, I said he looked different on the mound, just poised, way more advanced on the mound than his peers in Delmarva, and that didn't change at all. I think those three guys are extremely exciting. And I want to throw out one more name because we can't stop with the arms. Jared Beck, I don't know. He ended in Aberdeen, the 7-foot lefty, obviously. He started the year in his third stint with Delmarva. That first month or so was disastrous, and I was completely out. I get that he's 7 feet tall. He was a D2 arm. No rush with this kid. Like, keep working with him. If it takes 5 years, if it takes 6 years to sync everything up, then it takes 5 or 6 years. Doesn't matter. Whenever it clicks, it clicks. But I just felt like it was so bad in year 3 that, like, is there any future? Is he done? But then July and August, he combined for 18 innings, 3 earned runs, 28 strikeouts to 13 walks. 13 walks in 2 months is still not great, but he walked 10 or more each month the previous 2 months. So I don't know. He got the bump to high A to end the year. I think things are starting to move in the right direction for Beck, and I'm never going to be mad when these guys who I'm out on kind of prove me wrong.
Yeah, Beck really did a nice job overcoming what was a bad start to the year down at Delmarva. So hopefully that's a springboard for success in 2025. We'll shift to the offense now. And if you just look at the stats for the team as a whole, one thing that becomes apparent is that the Ironbirds ran a lot this year. In fact, they led the South Atlantic League with 363 steals. The next closest team, which was Bowling Green, the Rays affiliate, stole 262 bags. So they outpaced the closest team by 101 steals. The reason I bring that up is that the leader in the clubhouse for that was Enrique Bradfield Jr., 59 steals and 68 attempts during his time with the Ironbirds. And offensively, I think he ended up checking off every box that you would want to see in his development, even if it didn't really occur in the cleanest fashion. He got off to a slow start this year before hitting the IL with a concussion, but then came back and was one of the steadier hitters in Aberdeen's lineup after that. He worked that into a promotion to Double-A Bowie, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about what he's done with the Bay Sox next week. But he's hit pretty well there, and his time at Aberdeen, he's made a lot of adjustments. Bob, I'll start with you. How are you feeling about Bradfield as we wind down his first full season, most of which occurred at Aberdeen?
I feel pretty good about it. I don't think he's the eye-popping offensive prospect that we have seen from the Orioles in the past, but we've talked about it a bunch. Just the speed and defense alone, such a high floor, high ceiling as well. If he can get that hit tool going, he has a great eye. He gets on base. He'll take his walks. He'll steal his bases, no doubt about it. Can he bat 250 to 270 in the major leagues and have like a mid-ish 300 on base percentage and maybe hit some gaps, hit some doubles and triples, pop a home run over the scoreboard in right field at Camden Yards a few times? Remains to be seen. But I think we're headed in the right direction, and the fact that he got better as the season went on and his swing has looked better, just from a physical watching him play standpoint, you can tell that there's been progress made there. That is encouraging, and just got to see if we can keep it up as he rises up the rank.
Yeah. And with Aberdeen, the stolen base stuff, it was actually a minor league baseball record. Like, the Aberdeen Ironbirds this year stole more bases than any other team in the history of minor league baseball. It wasn't a Roberto Mercado thing, although he still does that in Bowie. Like, this is an Aberdeen thing. They just unleash these guys. But yeah, Bradfield, I feel very relieved. I'll say. I think that's a good word to describe how I feel with Bradfield now, because there were major question marks entering the year. He came out of the gate slow. I know pretty much everyone except Matthew Etzel does that in this organization, but he ended the year strong. You look at his Bowie numbers. I know we're talking about Aberdeen, but you look at his Bowie numbers right now. He's played in 21 games. He's got a 118 WRC plus. His strikeouts are way down. The walk rate is up. A smaller sample size, obviously, but he's hitting 272 with Bowie. Like, I feel relieved a little bit here with Bradfield, and I think things are trending in the right direction with him. And I found the tweet real quick. Shout out to Dan Sanchez at Orioles Review on Twitter. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you follow him already. But I really liked a tweet he had a couple of days ago. While Bradfield, I think he summarizes up Bradfield pretty perfectly here, at least my thoughts about Bradfield. While Bradfield has not done anything to tick up his 35 grade power this year, his success over 86 plate appearances in AA is reducing some of the uncertainty over whether his contact-oriented approach will translate to the upper levels. Agree with that. As I've tested out in other posts, a 650 OPS with his profile is probably enough to be a solid regular. A 700 OPS likely makes him a 3+ WAR player in the major leagues. Like that's, yeah. I mean, we talk a lot of, a year or so ago about Joey Ortiz. If he could just be a league average bat, that's a potential all-star major leaguer. I think that's even more so the case with Bradfield. Just barely a league average bat. With his speed, with his defense, and the chaos that he can cause on the base paths, Bradfield could be quite the major leaguer. And I feel better about him reaching that point after watching him this year.
Well, we've seen it with Cedric Mullins in Baltimore the past couple of years. Obviously, hasn't been the same guy as his 30-30 season a few years ago, but even this year with such a slow start, or at least a terrible month of May, he's got his OPS just back over 700, and I think his WAR is like 2.3, 2.4 right now already. Saw him make an incredible play this week in Boston, just outstanding diving catch. Like, you might get frustrated because the offensive numbers aren't what you want, but anything you can get offensively from a guy with that good a defense and that much speed, it's just a bonus.
Another guy that got to jump from Aberdeen to Bowie this year was Creed Willems. And in Willems, we're talking about a player with a much, much different profile than Bradfield. Willems, a catcher who has some serious power from the left side of the plate. And this continued a trend we've seen with Willems in his career so far, which is that he'll struggle to level, go back to that level the following year, and completely correct everything that was causing his struggles during his first stint. He did that in Delmarva last year, then was promoted to Aberdeen, and frankly just didn't hit very well for the Ironbirds during his 75-game run in 2023. However, much better for Aberdeen this year. 82 games, posted a 788 OPS, and his 13 home runs and 51 RBIs were team-leading totals for the Ironbirds. And although it's been a little bit up and down so far at a small sample size for Willems at Bowie, he's showing plenty of power there. I think that we're kind of all on the same page at this point about Willems, which is that the defense is solid. And if the hit tool can just continue to get a little bit better at each level, the Orioles have something here because you have left-handed power and a catcher and a guy that actually plays pretty solid first base when he's over there. But what specific adjustments do you think he made at Aberdeen that allowed him to be successful? And I'll start with Nick on that one.
The thing that sticks out to me the most with Creed is the walk and strikeouts. Like when he was at multiple levels in 2023. So we'll use when he was at high A in 2023, he had a almost 28% strikeout rate. That number dipped to 20.9% this year in high A. That is significant. The walk rate also went from 8.4% up to 10.7%. That's huge. He was a 123 WRC plus hitter in high A this year. We know the power is there. It really came out in game power this year, which was good to see, but the power's fun. But I love the walk and strikeout adjustment he made this year. That was phenomenal. And even it's only a 47 plate appearance size sample in AA so far, but he's only striking out 17% of the time in AA, and he already has 3 home runs. So yeah, he's only a 4% walk rate, only hitting 159, but the strikeouts. Like, if Creed Willems isn't going to strike out, like, he's going to be a pretty awesome bat for you. And that bat, if he sticks in Baltimore and there's some role, we don't need to worry about what the future role is. Basayo and Adler, who cares right now? He's what, 20? Is he 21 yet? Let's see. Yes, he just turned 21. He just turned 21 years old, just got promoted to AA. Let him rake over the next year or two in the minors. I think you've got I was very late in coming around on Creed. I will admit that. But I'm here now, and all aboard.
You just said let him rake, and that just reminds me, let Billy cook in Pittsburgh. Come on. I love seeing him have some success up there in Pittsburgh. But yeah, Creed Willems, for me, I think we saw something at least that we haven't seen him do yet as a professional, which was we've seen him have a hot start. We've seen him have a cold stretch. We saw him bounce back and get some consistency this year, which I thought was big. Maybe from a mindset perspective, I'm not sure. But I just like to see that, and it gives me faith that, he might be batting 159 with like a 5.55 OPS right now in Bowie. Perfect. This is perfect because he's going to come back next year and have like a mid 900 OPS through mid May, and he'll be right back on the radar again.
One more hitter I want to shout out at Aberdeen, and that's Tavian Josenberger. If you just look at batting average, you're going to look at his time in Aberdeen and think, well, what's impressive about a college hitter in high A who struggled to hit 230? Well, he walked 14% of the time, only struck out a little over 16% of the time, had a 117 WRC plus, and the offense was clearly ticking up when he was promoted to Bowie. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for him to land on the IL after he got to Bowie, which is why I wanted to make sure we included him in tonight's show. But what Josenberger does well, and it's an interesting skill set, can play multiple positions on the field, runs very, very well. I talked about Bradfield's stolen base total. Josenberger had 45 steals and 51 attempts with the Ironbirds and 50 and 56 overall this season. I just think that if the hit tool comes around at Bowie, which is very possible because he would not be the first prospect to have an underwhelming batting average at high A and then reverse that trend when he got to double A, we're going to be talking about him a lot more next season.
Yeah. And what gives me hope that that hit tool will emerge is 16% strikeout rate in Aberdeen this year, a 14% walk rate. I think Enrique Bradfield Jr. was the only hitter who had a lower swinging strike rate than Tavian Josenberger. So, like, this kid makes contact. He had a 257 BABIP in high A as well. So it got better in a small sample in double A. He was hitting well. He was hitting 300 in his 7 games. So I love Josenberger. The power from the left side, I think it's very real. I think the organization, pretty sure I talked about this maybe in our top 50 update, but I know I talked about this recently, but I feel like the organization at the beginning of the year wanted to work Josenberger more at second base. And with Bradfield's injury and then promotions and then trades, it forced him into the outfield again. But clearly this organization, I think, believes that he could be pretty valuable as like a second base center field type prospect. I think his last year at Arkansas, he didn't commit a single error in center field. And I know errors is a subjective stat sometimes, but still, like, I think this is a bit of a sleeper prospect here in the organization. I don't think he's ever going to get as much as respect as he should because, he's not going to hit 20 plus home runs. But yeah, you talk about Bradfield and the stolen bases, all that emphasis there. He's up to 50 combined stolen bases this year. Like, that's a feat into itself right there. Yeah, I think Josenberger is going to be a lot of fun to watch in that Bowie lineup next year. And I'm interested to see if it's more center field, more second base, but regardless, that bat could be pretty intriguing.
You got to use your feet to accomplish that feat, Tavian Josenberger. He's like the rich man's Luis Valdez. He's got the speed, plays second base, outfield, except he can actually hit a little bit. And I've seen him pop up on some analytically inclined Twitter pages that are like monitoring guys and who could pop up next year or at the end of the season if he didn't get hurt. And Josenberger has showed up on some of those lists. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what he can do once healthy, starting in Bowie in 2025.
So with the hitters, there was quite a bit of turnover in Aberdeen this year, and they had a lot of the college picks that the Orioles selected this year end the season there, including Vance Honeycutt, the top overall pick, along with Ethan Anderson, Austin O'Verne, Ryan Stafford, and Griff O'Farrell. We took a pretty deep dive into those players last week. All of them, kind of performed with mixed success in that 1 week stretch that they had at Aberdeen to end the year I would expect that all of them are going to be on Aberdeen's opening day roster next year. You had Matthew Etzel and Mac Horvath, who had two completely different paths to success with the Ironbirds before they were traded as part of the Zach Eflin deal. Etzel was, frankly, Aberdeen's best all-around player over the first month and a half. He turned that into a promotion to Bowie. Horvath took 2 months for him to get going at the plate, but he really turned it on in the last 2 months leading up to the trade. In fact, his 9 home runs were good for second on the Ironbirds. So both of those players stood out. They had a nice influx of prospects in the end, not just with the college hitters, but then players like Aaron Estrada, Leandro Arias, and Thomas Sosa, who we talked about at length last week, that made the jump from Delmarva to Aberdeen. But before we wrap up this episode, any other position players either one of you want to talk about from the Ironbirds?
I definitely want to shout out one guy. Well, first, I will say I'm holding out a little bit of hope with Jake Cunningham next year. I'm not gonna fully give up on Cunningham yet. I don't know. It was such a bad time in Delmarva, but a pretty decent into the year. It's going to be hard for me to give up on Cunningham completely, but hopefully he shows something next year. But I do want to shout out Jalen Vasquez, though. 20th round pick last year out of a D2 school. Started out really hot. Eventually, he did cool off. He only hit 216 this year in Aberdeen, but he had a 16% walk rate, a 101 WRC plus, stole 35 bases, 23 extra base hits, 4 triples, 4 home runs. He's a solid defender up the middle. I want to see him again next year, see if he can take a step forward. I just think a 20th round draft pick out of a D2 school who in his first full year of pro ball was a league average hitter in high A. I think that's kind of impressive. I think he did enough to warrant a hard look next year. But I was pretty impressed with Jalen Vasquez. Some nights he would flash a ton of tools and be arguably the most exciting player on that field in Aberdeen. And then he'd go cool for a couple weeks. But I think overall, when you look at his year, pretty solid year for Vasquez.
You have a couple guys, the reemergence of Reed Trimble, or the emergence just because of all the injuries. And of course, he's hurt right now as well. But he got up to AA Bowie after putting up an 829 OPS in high A and not that much playing time. He had 23 stolen bases, 13 doubles, 3 triples, 5 home runs, great walk rate. So glad to see Trimble back on the map, probably surpassed John Rhodes at this point, who we'll get into next week, I'm sure. And Douglas Hodo, for me, was a nice, pleasant surprise. We talked about him a bunch on the bonus segment throughout the year, but ended high A with a 775 OPS and 42 stolen bases for the Ironbirds, 12 doubles, 6 home runs, a triple. Also, he's now been promoted to AA Bowie, so 48 stolen bases on the season. He could get to 50 as well if he gets a couple this week with Bowie, but those are two other guys that I thought deserved a shout out.
Both good names to bring up there, and we'll have a lot more to talk about next week when we'll break down the Bowie Bay Sox season. We may also have some Major League coverage mixed in as well. Norfolk, by the way, will be the last minor league affiliate to end their season, which will be in a couple of weeks. Of course, between now and then and well into the offseason, we will have plenty of coverage for you here at Orioles on the Verge. And while you wait for us to return next week, you can catch us on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a paying member of our community. We have September's update to our top 50 list out. That's exclusive for patrons. You're going to want to catch that along with our bonus Discord channels that, again, are exclusive to paying members of our Patreon community. And we'll keep the offerings coming over the offseason. So don't feel like you've missed out if you're only signing up now. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by Bet Online and part of the Believe Podcast Network.